Okay, so let's dive right into this topic that I think is on everyone's plate these days.
Literally.
Yeah, literally, right? Processed food, ultra-processed food.
Hmm.
We've all heard these terms.
Right.
Maybe even felt a little dulty,
Yeah.
reaching for that brightly colored cereal box or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But what's the real deal here?
Yeah.
Are all processed foods bad? And how worried should we actually be about all this ultra-processed stuff?
Well, I think, the key here is not to demonize all processed food.
Right.
But to really understand kind of the nuances in the spectrum.
Okay.
And what's so fascinating is that food processing has actually been around for centuries.
I didn't realize that.
Oh, yeah.
I thought it was like a new thing.
Our ancestors,
It's a 20th century thing.
Yeah, no, our ancestors were masters of preservation.
Oh, wow.
Like drying, fermenting, salting.
Interesting.
It was all about extending the life of what they could grow and gather.
So it's not some newfangled invention of the modern food industry?
Not at all.
Okay.
But things really ramped up in the 20th century with industrialization.
I see.
Mass production, new additives.
Right.
And that shift toward convenience
Yeah.
really led to what we now call ultra-processed foods.
And that's where the concern comes in, right?
Exactly.
Like it seems like there's this
You can think about it this way.
line.
A loaf of bread from a local bakery,
Okay.
made with just a handful of recognizable ingredients,
Right.
flour, water, yeast, salt.
Mm-hmm.
That's a world apart from like a mass-produced loaf with a laundry list of additives you can barely pronounce.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the difference.
Right.
But how do we make sense of all of this when we're at the grocery store
Exactly.
and bombarded with all these choices?
So that's where the Novier classification system, I think, comes in handy.
Okay.
Think of it kind of like a decoder ring for your grocery list.
Okay.
It breaks down foods into 4 categories
Got it.
based on their level of process.
Yeah. Makes sense. All right, so group 1, this is the most basic, right?
Yes. Group 1 is unprocessed or minimally processed foods.
Okay.
This is your fresh produce, nuts, seeds,
Right.
unrefined grains, basically food in its natural state.
Okay.
What our ancestors would have recognized.
Yeah, back to the basics.
Exactly.
All right, what about group 2?
Group 2 is processed culinary ingredients.
Okay.
These are things we use in cooking but don't typically eat on their own.
Right.
So oils, vinegars, honey, spices,
Okay.
they're derived from natural sources
Mm-hmm.
but have undergone some processing
Yeah.
to make them shelf-stable or more versatile in the kitchen.
Yeah, okay, so those are like the building blocks of cooking.
Exactly.
And then we move on to group 3.
Right. Group 3 is processed foods.
Okay.
So think canned tomatoes,
Okay.
frozen fruits,
Cheese.
bread.
Right.
These are still recognizable as the original food,
Yeah.
but they've undergone processes like canning, freezing, or baking
Right.
to enhance flavor, preserve them, or make them more convenient.
So things that make our lives a bit easier without being overly complicated.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, then there's group 4,
Right.
the one everyone's talking about, ultra-processed foods.
The big one.
Yeah. So what is it that actually lands them in this category?
So ultra-processed foods, this is where things get interesting and potentially concerning.
Okay.
These have undergone extensive industrial processing
Right.
and often contain a long list of ingredients, many of which you wouldn't find in your pantry.
Okay.
Artificial flavors, colors, emulsifiers, texturizers, preservatives, all those things.
So it's not just the number of ingredients, but the type of ingredients too?
Absolutely.
All right.
Ultra-processed foods are often formulated to be hyper-palatable,
What does that mean?
meaning they're engineered to make you crave them and overeat.
Oh.
This is where the science of food processing meets the psychology of marketing.
Interesting. Clever, but maybe not so good for us.
Exactly.
I'm guessing. Yeah. All right. So studies have linked excessive consumption of ultra-processed foods to a range of health issues. So we're talking obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease,
Yep.
even some types of cancer.
It's a pretty serious list.
That's a serious list. Okay. So before we get into all the health impacts,
Okay.
I'm curious, where do some everyday foods fall in this Novier system?
Right.
Can we play a little guessing game?
I'm game. Let's do it.
Okay. All right. First up, yogurt.
Ooh.
Where do you think it lands?
Yogurt. That's a tricky one.
Yeah.
It really depends on the type.
Okay.
Plain yogurt with no added sugar would likely fall into group 3,
Okay.
but many flavored yogurts with added sugars,
Right.
artificial sweeteners, and other additives could be considered ultra-processed.
Oh, so it's all about those added ingredients.
Exactly.
All right. Okay. What about canned tuna?
Canned tuna. So that's typically just tuna and salt.
Right.
So that would be group 3.
Okay, processed food.
A processed food, yeah.
Okay, makes sense.
Last one.
Those pre-made protein smoothies you get at the grocery store.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think?
Those are almost certainly ultra-processed.
Yeah.
Yeah, they often contain a very long list of ingredients,
Right.
including protein powders, flavorings, thickeners, and sometimes added sugars.
Okay, you got it.
Yeah,
I think we're starting to get the hang of this NOVA system here.
I think so.
So knowing where a food falls on the scale is really just the first step.
Right.
The bigger question is what actually makes ultra-processed foods so potentially problematic
Right.
for our health?
So it's a combination of factors.
Okay.
First, they tend to be very calorie-dense and low in essential nutrients.
Okay.
They're often high in added sugars, unhealthy fats, and sodium,
Right.
while lacking in fiber, vitamins, and minerals.
Okay.
So this nutritional imbalance can contribute to weight gain and a whole cascade of metabolic issues.
So it's not just what they contain, but also what they displace in our diets,
Exactly.
right? Like if we're filling up on ultra-processed foods, we're missing out on like the good stuff.
You're missing out on those whole nutrient-rich options like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins.
Right. All the things our bodies need to actually thrive.
Yeah, exactly.
And this can have some pretty serious consequences, especially over time.
Absolutely. The research is pretty clear on this. Regularly consuming a diet high in ultra-processed foods is linked to an increased risk of chronic diseases,
Right.
obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and some types of cancer.
And it's not just physical health.
And it's not just physical health.
Right.
Right. Some studies even suggest a link between ultra-processed food consumption and mental health issues,
Oh,
like depression and anxiety.
interesting. Okay, so it's like a domino effect. You start with these seemingly harmless food choices,
Mm-hmm.
but then it impacts your overall well-being in
Yeah.
so many ways.
That's a great way to put it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's about recognizing the interconnectedness of our food choices in our health.
Yeah.
And this is a particular concern for vulnerable populations who often have limited access to fresh, healthy food options
Yeah.
and rely more heavily on cheaper ultra-processed foods,
Right.
which can create a cycle of poor nutrition and health disparities.
It's clear that this is a complex issue
Very complex.
with some far-reaching implications.
Yeah.
But before we get into those broader societal and environmental impacts,
Yeah.
I think it's important to understand exactly what makes ultra-processed foods so different
Mm-hmm.
on a molecular level. Like,
Yeah.
why are they so potentially harmful
Okay.
compared to minimally processed options?
That's a great question. And I think that really gets to the heart of why understanding food processing is so crucial.
Okay.
It's not just about the ingredients themselves, but how those ingredients are transformed through industrial processing
Right.
and what that does to their nutritional value
Okay.
and how our bodies interact with them.
So let's unpack that a bit more.
All right.
What are some of the key processing techniques that set ultra-processed foods apart?
Okay, so one key difference is the use of additives.
Okay.
Ultra-processed foods often contain this kind of cocktail of artificial flavors.
Right.
Colors, emulsifiers, texturizers, preservatives.
All that stuff.
While some of these additives are considered safe in small amounts,
Okay.
their cumulative effect on our health is not fully understood.
So it's not just about like one ingredient being bad, it's the overall combination and how they interact.
Exactly, within our bodies.
And the way these foods are processed can also impact their nutritional value.
Okay.
For example, refining grains strips away the bran and germ, which contain fiber and essential nutrients,
Right.
leaving behind just the starchy endosperm.
Okay.
This makes refined grains less filling and can lead to blood sugar spikes,
I see.
which can contribute to weight gain and other metabolic issues.
So it's like they're stripping away the good stuff
That's a good analogy.
and leaving behind the less desirable parts.
Right. Interesting.
And then there's the issue of the Maillard reaction.
Okay, I've heard of this.
Have you heard of this?
I don't really know what it is, though.
So this is a chemical reaction that occurs when sugars and amino acids are heated together,
Okay.
producing those characteristic drown flavors and aromas we love in cooked foods.
Ah, so that's what makes things taste so good.
Exactly.
Okay.
But the Maillard reaction can also produce harmful compounds called advanced glycation end products, or AGEs,
Wow.
which have been linked to inflammation and oxidative stress in the body.
Okay.
Ultra-processed foods, because they often undergo multiple stages of high heat processing, tend to be higher in AGEs.
So those tempting flavors can come at a hidden cost.
They can.
That's a lot to consider.
It is.
Wow.
And, this is just scratching the surface of the science behind ultra-processed foods.
Yeah.
There's still a lot we don't know
Yeah.
about how these foods impact our health in the long term.
It sounds like we need more research
Definitely.
to fully understand all the complexities
Mm.
of ultra-processed foods and their effect on our bodies. But in the meantime, knowing what we know now,
Right?
what are some practical steps we can take to kind of navigate this whole food landscape
Yeah,
and make healthier choices?
that's a great question, and one that we'll delve into deeper
Okay.
as we continue this deep dive.
Right.
It's not about eliminating all processed foods from your diet.
Right.
It's about making informed choices
Yeah.
and prioritizing whole, minimally processed options
Right.
whenever possible.
Okay.
And it's about kind of shifting our mindset
I see.
from convenience and instant gratification
Right.
to a more mindful approach to eating.
I love that it's about taking back control of our plates
Yes.
and making choices that support both our individual health and the well-being of the planet.
Absolutely.
But before we jump into all those action steps,
Okay.
let's shift gears
Okay.
and explore the broader impacts of ultra-processed foods,
Let's do it.
starting with their environmental footprint.
Okay. So we've been talking about the impact of ultra-processed foods on our health.
Right.
But their environmental footprint is equally concerning.
Yeah.
It's time to zoom out and see how our food choices connect to this bigger picture of planetary well-being.
Okay, let's zoom out.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin to unpack this?
You're right.
It feels like such a massive issue.
It is a massive issue, but I think a good place to start is to think about the journey
Okay.
of a typical ultra-processed food item
Mm-hmm.
from farm to factory to your plate.
Right.
Every step has environmental consequences.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning with the ingredients themselves.
Okay, so many ultra-processed foods rely heavily on ingredients like palm oil, soy, and corn,
Right.
often grown on these massive industrial farms,
Okay.
these monocultures.
Mm.
Vast fields of a single crop
Yeah.
can lead to deforestation, habitat loss, and the overuse of fertilizers and pesticides.
And those chemicals don't just stay on the farm, do they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Runoff from these chemicals pollutes waterways, harms wildlife, and disrupts ecosystems.
Right.
And then there's the energy-intensive process of turning these raw ingredients into, those shelf-stable, brightly packaged products we
Right.
find in the supermarket.
It's like there's this hidden environmental cost
There is.
baked into every ultra-processed food item.
Precisely.
Wow.
The processing, the packaging, the transportation, it all adds up.
Yeah.
Think about all those plastic wrappers boxes,
Ah.
single-serving portions.
Right. It all ends up in the trash.
Much of this ends up in landfills or contributes to the growing problem of plastic pollution in our oceans.
It makes you realize that convenience often comes at a cost,
It does.
not just to our health, but to the environment as well.
Absolutely.
And we can't forget about greenhouse gas emissions.
Right.
All of this contributes to climate change.
Yes. The production and distribution of ultra-processed foods contributes significantly to climate change.
Right.
From deforestation to the energy needed to power factories and transport goods across the globe.
It's a sobering thought, realizing how our everyday food choices are intertwined with these global environmental challenges.
It is.
And I imagine that globalization plays a role in all of this as well.
Absolutely. Globalization has made it easier for food companies to source ingredients from all over the world
Right.
and create these complex supply chains.
Yeah,
While this can bring economic benefits,
sure.
it can also lead to a disconnect between consumers and the origins of their food.
Right. We often don't even know.
We don't know where our food comes from, how it was grown, or the environmental impact of getting it to our tables.
It's like we're losing touch with the story behind our food.
Exactly. And this disconnect can make it easier to overlook the environmental consequences of our choices.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's also worth noting that globalization can lead to a homogenization of diets,
What does that mean?
with ultra-processed foods becoming more readily available and affordable.
Oh, I see.
In countries where traditional diets once centered around fresh, local ingredients,
Right.
this can have cultural implications,
Interesting.
as well as health and environmental impacts.
It's like a ripple effect,
It is.
with these changes in our food system influencing not just what we eat,
Right.
but how we live and relate to the world around us.
You've hit on a key point. This isn't just an individual issue.
Right.
It's about the systems that shape our food choices
Mm-hmm.
and the need for systemic change
Yeah.
to create a more sustainable and equitable food future.
Okay, so we've talked about the negative impacts.
Yeah,
Are there any glimmers of hope here?
I think so.
Are companies doing anything to address the environmental footprint?
I think there are definitely some companies taking steps in the right direction.
Okay.
Some are investing in more sustainable sourcing practices, working to reduce waste and emissions, and exploring more eco-friendly packaging options.
That's encouraging, but how can we be sure that these initiatives are truly making a difference and
Right.
not just greenwashing?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
It's important to be critical and look beyond marketing claims. Look for third-party certifications like fair trade or organic labels,
Right.
which can provide more transparency and accountability.
Okay.
And support companies that are transparent about their supply chains
Yeah.
and actively working to reduce their environmental impact.
So it's about being informed consumers,
Yes.
doing our research,
Absolutely.
and making choices that align with our values.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual choices.
Right.
We need to advocate for policies that incentivize sustainable practices, hold companies accountable, and create a more level playing field for businesses that are prioritizing the environment.
It sounds like a combination of individual action and systemic change is key here.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Now, let's bring this back to the personal level.
Okay.
We've talked about the environmental impact of these massive systems,
Mm-hmm.
but how do our individual choices as consumers factor into this?
That's a great question. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of these issues
Right.
and wonder if our individual actions can really make a difference.
It's an understandable feeling,
Yeah.
but I believe that every choice we make has an impact.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that we're not just consumers,
Right.
but citizens with the power to shape the marketplace and influence change.
So how can we become more conscious consumers when it comes to processed and ultra-processed foods? What are some practical steps we can take to align our choices with our values?
It starts with awareness.
Okay.
The more we understand about how our food is produced, processed, and marketed,
Right.
the better equipped we are to make informed decisions.
So knowledge is power.
It is.
But it's not just about knowing the facts. It's also about being mindful of our own habits and triggers.
Exactly. Pay attention to what you're buying and why.
Mm-hmm.
Read labels, compare ingredients,
Right.
and be critical of marketing claims.
Eh.
Ask yourself, where did this food come from? How is it produced?
Yeah.
What are the potential environmental and social impacts of my choice?
It's about being curious and asking questions, not just blindly accepting what's presented to us.
Precisely. And don't be afraid to experiment in the kitchen.
That's a good point.
Cooking at home can be fun and empowering.
Yeah.
And it gives you more control over the ingredients and quality of your food.
It's about reclaiming that connection with our food
I love that.
and understanding where it comes from.
It's about rediscovering the joy of cooking, experimenting with new flavors,
Right.
and creating meals that nourish both our bodies and our souls.
And it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
It doesn't.
Right. Even small changes can make a difference.
Absolutely. Start by incorporating more whole, unprocessed foods into your diet.
Okay.
Choose fresh fruits and vegetables over packaged snacks.
Mm-hmm.
Cook meal from scratch a few times a week.
Okay.
These small steps can add up over time
Yeah.
and have a ripple effect on your health, your community, and the planet.
It's a reminder that our choices matter and that we have the power to create a more just and sustainable food system,
We do.
one meal at a time.
Well said. And speaking of creating a more just food system,
Yeah.
there's another crucial aspect we need to discuss: the role of regulations and policies
Okay.
in shaping what ends up on our plates.
Right.
This is where the conversation moves beyond individual choices and into the realm of collective action and systemic change.
Okay, let's dive into that. What role can governments and regulatory bodies play in addressing the challenges posed by ultra-processed foods? We've talked about making conscious choices as individuals,
Yeah.
but it seems like we need larger scale action to
Hmm.
really shift the landscape of processed and ultra-processed foods.
Right.
So what kind of role can governments and regulatory bodies play in all of this?
You're absolutely right. Individual choices are important,
Mm-hmm.
but they can only go so far. We need supportive policies and regulations
Right.
to create a food environment that nudges us toward healthier
Yeah.
and more sustainable options.
So what would that look like in practice?
Well, we're already seeing some promising initiatives around the world. For example, several countries have implemented taxes on sugary drinks,
Okay.
which have been shown to reduce consumption
Right.
and generate revenue that can be used to fund health programs.
That makes sense if something's less affordable.
Right.
People tend to buy less of it. What other strategies are being explored?
Another area of focus is front-of-package labeling.
Oh, yeah.
You know those colorful stickers and logos
Right.
that often appear on food packaging?
Right. Sometimes I feel like I need a degree in nutrition just to decipher a food label.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They can be very misleading
Yeah.
and make it hard to quickly assess the nutritional value of a product.
Okay, so clearer labeling.
So some countries are implementing clearer labeling systems
Okay.
that use simple symbols or color coding to indicate the healthfulness of a product.
I see.
This helps consumers make informed choices at a glance.
That sounds like a great way to empower consumers to make healthier choices.
Exactly.
What about marketing, especially to children?
Right.
We know those ads can be incredibly persuasive.
You're right. Children are particularly vulnerable to marketing tactics.
Yeah.
So some countries are restricting or banning the advertising of unhealthy foods to children,
Okay.
particularly on television on online platforms.
That seems like a logical step.
It is.
Protecting children from those persuasive messages.
Absolutely.
Are there any regulations specifically targeting ultra-processed foods?
That's a newer area of focus.
Okay.
Some countries are starting to explore ways to regulate ultra-processed foods more directly.
Okay, so what could that look like?
This could involve things like stricter labeling requirements
Right.
for ultra-processed products, limitations on the use of certain additives,
Okay.
or even taxes on these foods.
So really kind of hitting it from all angles.
Exactly.
Okay, it sounds like there's a lot of momentum building.
I think so.
To address this issue on a policy level, what about international efforts?
Yeah.
Are there any global initiatives to promote healthier and more sustainable food systems?
Yes. International organizations like the World Health Organization
Okay, the WHO.
and the Food and Agriculture Organization
It's FAO.
are playing a key role in developing guidelines and recommendations for countries to adopt.
Got
Yeah. And this collective pressure
Yeah.
is what drives change.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play
Yes.
in shaping a healthier and more sustainable food future,
Absolutely.
whether it's through our individual choices, our
Mhm.
advocacy efforts, or our support for companies and organizations that are leading the way.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive,
It has.
filled with insights and food for thought.
Lots of food for thought.
As we wrap up, what's one key takeaway you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I'd say this, don't underestimate the power of your choices.
Okay.
Every time you choose a food item, you're casting a vote
Right.
for the kind of food system you want to see.
That's a great way to put it.
By making informed choices, supporting sustainable businesses,
Mhm.
and advocating for change, you can be part of creating a more just delicious and nourishing food future for all.
Beautifully said. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of processed and ultra-processed foods. We hope this deep dive has empowered you to make more conscious choices and to be part of the movement towards a healthier and more sustainable food future